It's your birthday.
Yep, the year rolls around again.
Happy birthday.
I'm 17,166 days old, and in commercial terms, I've clocked up 10,299 working weeks. And on a massive scale, in terms of universe, I'm 0.047 of a millennia. The numbers don't lie. So that's the stats, the statistics. I'll give you an annual figure at the end. Anyway, today I want to talk to you about the problem of reckless optimism, particularly in the domain of statistical data. Critics claim that there's a positive outlook or an overly optimistic presentation of data which simply ignores the real-world problems facing the world. This optimism thwarts or diminishes a desire to take action to solve real massive global problems. We've seen consequences of this. We've been riding a wave of optimism for quite a while, and now we are seeing rioting flaring up globally like viruses, such as, well, the France's Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests. We've had election meddling through massive data targeting, and not ignoring the militancy of schoolgirl Greta Thunberg. Her incantations are forcing more and more public debate around the Green Deal. So what has caused this backlash against optimism? Episode 3 of Up Your English, we'll look at this crisis of optimism. Have we really had enough of it? To explore the possible reasons for this change in attitude, let's look at the domain of statistical data interpretation. Easily visualized as graphs, pie charts, in fact, all manner of visual interpretations are possible. These information graphics can overgeneralize. They can overgeneralize to the extent that things look binary. Everything either looks great or conversely, everything comes across as disastrous. And more, the world's data is getting squeezed and presented to us through a lens of information graphics. The categories being used ranging from health to wealth, growth to decline. If you can think of a category, you can guarantee it is being measured. So then, what has sparked this fury against optimism, this extreme reaction? One such information graphic comes to my mind, and hopefully it will help me more fully explain this increasing distrust of optimism. It's concerning a visualization which basically plots our history, our story, our economic story spanning the period of 100 years, revealing that as a global population of 7 billion, approximately, collectively we are living healthier and wealthier lives than ever before. Access to health and improved access to jobs has systematically improved. But this optimism has a nemesis, and this nemesis comes in the form of stories. You know, the ones you see in your newsfeed, stories in the news cycle. Be it about employment and zero-hour contracts, how plastic is polluting the ocean's fish stocks, that bushfires are destroying biodiversity in both Australia but also in Brazil's Amazon rainforest, an increase in mortality rates from excessive drug and alcohol use, but also injustice from financial corruption and the rise of political populism. The list is endless, and consequently, this prevalence of such cataclysmic events are quite correctly diverting our attention away from the fact that the world has actually improved. So this week's proposition to consider is, in the midst of all the stuff that's going down, in all the really bad stuff that's going on, is optimism actually dead? Even if the facts show health and income have collectively improved, have we actually just become fact resistant? I'll touch on the idea of resistance to facts a little later. But first, on to looking at the role of data analysts. Through applying their expertise, they are the ones presenting and making representative models of the world. Their vocabulary of choice is visual rather than verbal and look like charts and graphs. Basically, information graphics. It's a form of editing, a means of being selective with data, and the data they choose to amplify or simply discard or omit. This act of amplifying certain data whilst ignoring other data suggests a bias. And to be biased is a kind of taking sides. A kind of like, let's say, this is good data, we should only show that. The other data, well, let's keep it aside for a while. Consequently, ignoring some data over other data obviously presents a one-sided perspective. It is, you might say, a hazard of the job, a problem which is inherent in the analyst's job. Data analysts therefore attract quite a few critics of their work, though they're not being accused of really lying, just simply shaping the truth. The reasoning behind this accusation of, well, a slight dishonesty, I'll touch on later. In short though, the use of data, then, no matter how objective and factual, once envisaged as its visual form, it gets totally criticised for failing to be an objective measure, an objective view of the world. Data, it is assumed, equals objectivity, and if it's not presenting objectivity, then these infographics require classification. These two classifications of infographic then are maybe optimism versus pessimism. So one of them can be said to be visualizing insights optimistically, and the other can be said to be visualizing insights pessimistically. How do you like your data then? Do you prefer it dosed up with optimism or pessimism? Maybe an unfair question there. But being pessimistic or optimistic, let's consider the inherent bias in a data analyst's job. They are the people who use data to interpret the world. Their job is to put results, data, figures, statistics into a form which can easily be read. Their tasks include presenting to us, the public, but to companies too, a vision of how the world functions. And we may accept these results, this data, these figures, statistics, or really dismiss them. Evidently then, some interpretations of data will show optimism. Hey, isn't everything great? Isn't everything looking rosy? And on the flip side comes pessimism. Yes, whoa, things are looking terrible. Everything is so bad. Everything is bleak. Data analysts then are susceptible to being accused for being over-optimistic or, on the opposite side, over-pessimistic. Their critics claim they hold distorted lenses to the world, actually misinterpreting the data. And to interrogate this, we're going to look at one specific case. It's a health versus income information graphic, which I mentioned at the beginning. It's from a well-known, and let me add well-respected Swedish physician called Hans Rosling. Additionally to being known for his work as a physician, Rosling is also an author, presenter, and most importantly, he's a data analyst. And his fiercest critic has called Rosling himself a self-serving optimist. Let's just look at this idea, this expression of being self-serving. Is it such a bad thing to be self-serving then? So Rosling presents data in an entertaining way. He uses animated graphics to chart the improvement that the world has seen over the last 100 years. In short, he presents a factual, optimistic view of the world that over the last 100 years of collected data, the result is that the health and wealth of the world has gotten better. It has collectively improved. The data proves this, the data shows this. Though Rosling's fierce critics say his view of the world is reckless, problematic, they call this over-optimism. Basically that data analysts must not ignore the pessimistic data when presenting the data which reveals real measured progress. It's as if maybe they're claiming there is an optimist cartel out there, who are there to benefit from presenting only optimistic data, Optimism that the world's wealth and health is improving. To use a crude analogy, what if optimism was seen as an illicit, illegal drug? A drug with a street value? Is Rosling then a dealer in optimism? And are we consuming all this optimism so much that we've gotten addicted to it? So maybe now we're on a collective detox, the pessimistic slide. But I'm not ready to give it up yet. Neither maybe are you. Yet before looking at the effect optimism has on perceiving the world, I want to take a pause just to further define the information graphic. Also, my interest in information graphics as a form of communication, and maybe look at its limitations. My interest begins with my bachelor's degree, my BA, which was in, at the time, a new discipline. This discipline, offered by Coventry University in the UK, was called technical writing. The degree has been set up as a vocational degree in collaboration with Rolls-Royce, the luxury car manufacturer, and its purpose to train writers in the art of communicating technical data and cutting through complicated and engineering specifications which, well, could be too difficult for the public to even try to comprehend. My training then consisted in learning to interpret complex units of engineering information and to re-communicate it to non-technical people, users, the end users of possibly consumer products. Yes, the course had, in the end, very little connection with Rolls-Royce, the luxury car manufacturer, but instead focused on writing, editing, and producing documentation, such as the instruction manuals. You know this as the little folded piece of paper document which gets shipped with a new stereo, a microwave, a toaster. And I was actually writing these. Very dull work indeed. Boring, I thought. Boring, ahem. Anyway, here's a language tip. Do you read the instructions or just pick up and press the buttons of any new device you buy, anything you purchase? In terms of functionality, do instructions serve a purpose? But also, instructions, they can be a fantastic language learning resource. So for a spot of language acquisition, maybe read the instructions in the language you're learning. I have to admit that I actually do so. Maybe I'm baking a pizza even, so reading the pizza box. You know, I make an effort to read the French instructions first, and then I verify any unfamiliar words, the words or expressions that seem odd or I don't understand, and so verify these by reading or casting an eye over the English version. Eventually, though, producing instructions for music stereos, microwaves, and toasters seemed like a really dull job, though I really did enjoy tinkering around with stuff, with objects to work out how to best explain its functionalities to the consumer into easy digestible units that anybody could quickly and easily understand. But as a career move in technical writing, these two words together sounded so boring. What was I doing? Where would I even end up working? The only choices at the time were either IBM, Microsoft, or Hewlett-Packard. The prospect was a depressing one. Little did I imagine though, well, I think none of us could have predicted how the discipline of technical writing would blossom, would bloom into something of a more colourful and diverse job, a more diverse profession. Today we have Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, the GAFAMs, which all rely heavily on the skills of technical writers. There's even the gaming industry, music platforms, and VoIP, voice over internet protocols, such as WhatsApp. And dare I say, if I had been more optimistic and stuck with it, today I'd be producing documentation on the uses of, let's say, the connected kitchen appliances. These appliances which function as part of the Internet of Things. But would that have been a less boring prospect? The Internet of Things, kitchens, I'd still be writing about toasters. Anyway. So this university story, I was harbouring a love of graphic design. I soon started merging the two disciplines, technical writing and graphic design, eventually moving into what you might call information design. Not quite technical communications or writing, and not quite graphic design and layout. But you can see information design as requiring both visual and written elements. And this discipline today has evolved as information graphics. And there's a book written on the subject titled Information is Beautiful by David McCandless being one of the most well-known. Information graphics then, what are they? How can we define them? Well, they're smaller units of information or data visualized in colorful ways using icons and symbols. The icons and symbols can signify data in a variety of ways to illustrate quantities, volumes, amounts, etc. in the form of a typical graph, not a graphic, but a graph. This basic form of information graphic quickly reveals correlations and clusters. Can you picture it? There are two axes. The x-axis travels along the bottom horizontally below and has a category labeled, let's say, with the keyword lifespan. And the y-axis rides up the page vertically. Let's say this has a category labeled income. In the simplicity of this visual data, the plotted data lines overlap and intersect and signify correlations. Some extremely obvious and others less so. And then there are clusters of data, nodes, which are literally colliding, bumping into each other, exposing obvious trends. Caution though is required when reading them. I mean, even if this graph reveals obvious correlations and exposes obvious trends, it's important not to be hypnotized, duped, fooled by this data. This is dressed up data. And to its extreme, it can be considered as presenting an illusion of reality, and so as something to be distrustful of. Check out the work of contemporary Italian philosopher Federico Campagna. Campagna dedicates a chapter of his 2018 book Technique and Magic, The Reconstruction of Reality, to talking about optimism as this thing of an illusion of a reality. Basically, what's the upshot? Well, be wary of data that is shaped and diffused as an information graphic. I'm sure, though, that everyone listening to this episode is skeptical of information. Like, you take time to consider its authenticity, and more generally, more and more of us are more and more skeptical. By skeptical, I mean that as consumers, especially scrolling through news stories on our phones, we have to filter the good stuff from the bad stuff. In short, we are more educated and ready to call into question information and knowledge. And by asking a few simple questions, specific questions, we can choose to either trust or dismiss what's being presented. On the roster, the list of questions you might ask is: 1. Who funded the original research? This being a question from the Aaron Schwartz episode I touched on in episode 2. Then the second one, what's the affiliation of the researcher? And third and finally, what is the political bias, the point of view of where you are seeing the research? And now to you, what about you? What's your experience of dealing with this idea of optimism? Before moving on, I'd like to invite you to reflect on your own experience, maybe, let's say, thinking optimistically. Say, for instance, you're presented with a problem at work, with your boss, in the office, between colleagues, at home, a family issue, a situation between friends. There is a problem which needs resolving. Are you then the type of person who sees the bigger picture? Or do you get stuck on the little details? And if you don't quickly find a solution to the problem, do you simply optimistically ignore it? Because as we all know, and as the expression goes, everything works out okay in the end. But does it? For you then, are you the type of person to quickly resolve problems? Or do you hope Such problems will eventually resolve themselves and fizzle out. Either way, acting to resolve a problem or simply ignoring a problem, how do you categorize, how do you label yourself? Are you likely to be more receptive when data gets presented with an optimistic outcome, or are you likely to be receptive to the more pessimistic clickbaity stuff that passes through Facebook? Okay, so for the sake of argument, let's say there are two options, that your values are aligned with the optimists' camp, basically seeing the bright side of things, the sunny, the shiny side. We can call these the upsides or the pros. And at all costs, your superpower is in your ability to block, to avoid, to override any of the negatives. You use your magic powers to positively ensure this. Or, in contrast, you maybe align yourself to the pessimists' camp, eager to expose the weaknesses, the more bleak side, the negatives. We can call these the downsides or the cons. Either optimist or pessimist. Is being optimistic such a problem? I mean, if the historical or predicted data is actually showing an optimistic trajectory and showing things are systematically improving, systematically getting better and better, then why is optimism under attack and attracting fierce critics? Where has this ferocious reaction to optimism come from then? And why be so suspicious of optimism? It's as if being optimistic is being seen as an infection, a disease, something to eradicate. And the antidote, the medicine we can swallow to protect us against optimism, is, in fact, pessimism. Or is it more simply that we need to strike a balance of the two? We see the spread of pessimism. It's like all over Facebook. It's an infectious virus. Post after repost, comments, trolls. Those friends who are constantly angry and reposting and commenting on issues of injustice and equality. In between, of course, posting cute pictures of cats. Didn't sociologist Marshall McLuhan once say, "The message is the medium. The message here is Facebook is stupid." Injustice and equality are real problems, and without any doubt they require realistic, practical solutions. So maybe optimism has been eclipsed by the pessimistic wave, so much so that when it's presented to us we ignore it, dismiss it as being honest, and we are keen to relegate it to the depths of being fake news. This mentality comes with serious consequences though, yes, since if facts are positive, then maybe we are becoming resistant to them. It's not fair to be positive when such bad stuff is going on. Fact resistance has become a thing. And looking at this phenomenon of fact resistance offers a start towards seeing where this backlash against optimism stems. It's our physician and data analyst Rosling, whose information graphics have come under fire, majorly criticised for being dishonest, who actually helped tackle the problem of fact resistance in his book called Factfulness. Factfulness being a totally invented zeitgeist word, one which you'll find only probably lurking around the online Urban Dictionary. And additionally, a digression, just to tell you how I found out about Hans Rosling's work. Well, it all comes down to Louis, one of the many socially curiously minded students at Ep3 Information Science School in Paris. Louis lent me his copy of the book, and that's where my fascination to discover more on Rosling evolved. So thanks, Louis. And this connection with society is a salient quality I see often in the minds of information science students. They are as much connected to societal issues as they are into coding and inventing and problem solving. Geeks, you could say, are possibly as adept at commenting on societal issues as are their sociological student counterparts. The benefit they have over the pure humanities subjects, though, is their technical nous. In other words, they possess a useful technical ability to put their ideas into action, to act on ideas. They are technically enabled. For more on that idea, let me signpost you to the Aaron Schwartz story on episode 2. Factfulness then. The suffix ness and the words fact and full glued or stuck together, the title suggests that people use facts to their own ends. It is like you simply choose a fact, which proves your point, and there you go, factfulness. A corrupt use of published data may be published facts. This fact taken out of context can easily prove a point no matter how weak. It's a kind of self-serving of facts then. You serve up these units of info to convince people you are right. Oh, the humiliation of being possibly proved wrong. Maybe today's episode isn't so much a crisis of optimism then, but more it's about a crisis of ego. There's just a thought. So earlier I mentioned the idea of the self-serving optimists. It was in an article why you should not listen to the self-serving optimists like Rosling and Pinker. The article referring to Steven Pinker, a Canadian guy who champions reason, science, humanism and progress. The article warns against optimism, written from the Swedish sociologist Roland Paulsen. Paulsen throws shade at Rosling too, in particular by suggesting there's an optimism agenda. Paulsen qualifies there is such a thing as an optimism agenda by connecting the data analyst Rosling with billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates, claiming that there's a reason Bill Gates loves Rosling and Pinker, their analysis obscure inequality. Let's look at that. Basically, if billionaire philanthropists like Bill Gates are championing the work of Rosling, then it must be considered that there's an optimism agenda, which ultimately is about making profit. Optimism has become a tool and a platform which can help powerful people maintain their grip on the power structures in which they already thrive. Okay, so later this year, 2020, a posthumously titled Hans Rosling Center for Population Health opens. The construction of the research facility is costing $230 million, with nearly all the money being stumped up by and invested by, wait for it, the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation. Bill Gates is a massive fan of Rosling's, and on Gates's YouTube channel he reviews Rosling's book, Factfulness, with graphics to ensure that its message effectively penetrates. And that message is that there's no problem with overpopulation. The point is that with a seismic shift in mentality about how we see how the world is organized, then we can see that the global population of 7.8 billion inhabitants have higher lifespans and increased incomes than ever in the last 100 years. Billionaire philanthropy then, at least the aspect of Bill Gates' $210 million donation, it seems has found a home in the realm of promoting optimism. Rosling died 3 years ago, and so February the 7th, 2020 marks the 3rd anniversary of his passing. On the one hand then, Gates' decision to have the Centre for Population Health named after his good friend Rosling is a sentimental one. It will be called the Hans Rosling Center for Population Health, a place of research in all aspects of health, medically, economically and socially. Strategically, let's pull back a bit. On the one hand then, we've seen that Rosling's name is linked to and associated with optimism for all his work as a physician, presenter, author, and advocate of reasoned and critical thinking. On the other hand, with Melinda and Bill Gates' major investment in the construction of this new institution, how would this alternative name sound? Wait for it. The Melinda and Bill Gates Center for Population Health. Any good? So there you have it. Optimism. It's led to the construction of a new multi-million-dollar institution which can hopefully tackle the major population health issues of recent times. What's your take on optimism then? Is optimism bias a problem? Just to comment on On the perceived success of the Hans Rosling Centre for Population Health, I wonder, will it become a roaring success or a dreadful failure? Is it simply going to peddle optimistic findings or solve the massive urgent issues of the day? Only time will tell. No doubt, though, this institution will attract its critics. Though criticism is a great and good thing, after all, criticism and challenge encourages debate. But ultimately, what about a life void of optimism, a society void of optimism? Big ideas and grand initiatives would most likely get stifled. And big ideas are necessary, society needs that. So let's get peddling that mindset of optimism to stand its ground against the pessimists. But a final word of caution: to do it with a measure of critical analysis, weigh up the pros and cons, its flaws and shortcomings alongside the possibilities and benefits it presents. That's it. That's the end of this podcast episode. My age then, in terrestrial years, I'm at the tail end of my 40s. 17,166, 210,099, 47 years old. Thank you very much for listening again. I hope you're interested in discovering the work of Rosling. And do leave a comment on YouTube if you listen there. Is optimism in crisis? If you have any comments, otherwise don't hesitate to write me and let me know what you think. As usual, I would like to remind you that if you like the podcast and want to help me, you can leave an evaluation on iTunes if you listen to podcasts on iTunes or on other apps like Spotify. That way I can reach more and more listeners and help more and more people up their English. Of course, there will be a new podcast episode soon, and during that we'll talk about the infamous OkCupid experiment. I wonder when that episode will be out then. The clue is obviously related to that episode's theme. Thanks then, I'm out of here. I better get writing and recording. Bye bye.